Elkaim is a registered holistic nutritionist.
Is a New York Times bestselling author,
He's a fitness expert.
former professional athlete, and the founder and CEO of Healthpreneur.
Yuri Elkaim.
Learning the art of influence, of persuasion, of sales. Most entrepreneurs, regardless of their industry, will tell you that sales is one of the most important skills you can develop.
What was one of the most unconventional pieces of advice that you've received in your journey in entrepreneurship?
I used to work with Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach. He didn't say this to me directly, but I was obviously in a workshop with him. He said,
Hey everybody, welcome back to the $100 MBA Show. I'm Omar Zenhom, your host. And once a month on this podcast, we bring on an expert to teach their area of expertise, a great mind sharing their journey to success, how they did it and how you could do it too. Sometimes we'll bring on an accomplished entrepreneur, a best-selling author, maybe an incredible athlete. Today, we have somebody who is all three. Yuri Elkaim is a New York Times best-selling author, a former professional athlete, was a professional soccer player, and a renowned business strategist, and now the founder and CEO of Healthpreneur. He helps health professionals go from 6 to 7 figures and beyond. Today, we discuss his journey. We talk about how from a young age, he started playing soccer and became a pro in his 20s. How from a young age, he realized even though he's an athlete, he's actually not that healthy because he started losing his hair due to an autoimmune disease. This kind of like jolted him into action and got him to think seriously about what is healthy really. And it became his life's work. What I love about Yuri is that he's just really genuine in the way he helps others. And you could tell in today's conversation that he's really coming from a place of wanting to help you get better. He cuts through the BS and kind of tells you, hey, don't do all this stuff. This is the stuff that works. And this is what I love about today's episode, today's lesson, I say. But he really is able to teach us the gems that he picked up along the way. And not only did he build his empire, but along the way, he's helped over 50,000 people to get better and to get healthier. His best-selling books and his wisdom has been shared on Dr. Oz, on the TV show The Doctors. And he's not just all talk. He's built multiple businesses, one he sold after building for 13 years. And today, he's got a multi-million-dollar business helping health professionals grow their business. Healthpreneur, which we'll talk about in the chat. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the conversation with Yuri Elkaim. You're going to absolutely love this one. Let's get into it. Yuri, so good to have you on the show. I heard about you for many years. I was glad to see your name in my inbox when we kind of lined you up for this talk. You know, when we hear about people, when we know them online, we Google them, we see their websites, we kind of understand what they do and what they're about. But what I want to kind of start with is, what are some of the things from maybe your childhood, from you growing up, your household, that kind of really influence who you are as a person today and even as an entrepreneur?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me, Omar. This is it's a pleasure to be here. So I'd say one of the things that's maybe a lot of people don't know that I don't share publicly is the fact that my parents divorced when I was a young age. So I was like maybe 10 or 11 when they divorced. Obviously, it happens to, a lot of people, but I think what was interesting is that my mom was in corporate and my dad was an entrepreneur. So my dad had a retail shop. My mom worked for Exxon and Pure Oil. She did the corporate travel for like the chairman and stuff. And it's just very interesting growing up with two very different personalities from that perspective. And I saw from my mom, I'm like, I never want to be in situations where it's like, my manager is such a, and like dealing with that stuff, politics of the corporate world, but also seeing my dad, for the most part, a solopreneur. He ran his own retail store, but he was in the store. Like, he didn't trust anyone to really handle his affairs. And obviously at the time, a lot of it was cash, right? So he actually would have, I remember 2 people that he eventually employed, and then they fell apart because, people were paying for a suit, $2,000 cash, and then the cash is not accounted for. And then there's all this stuff. And he was working 7 days a week, right? So I never really didn't see him that much. So growing up, I saw those two perspectives. And I remember, like, sometimes our best role models are negative role models. And for me, both of my parents were negative role models. And I say that in the nicest way possible. Like, I learned a lot about entrepreneurship from my dad. And I was like, I never want to have that. I want to have a business that works for me, that I don't have to be there 24/7. And I want to help a lot of people. And at the same time, seeing what my mom went through was a blessing, because I'm like, I would never want to work in a cubicle, never work at that kind of company. And so that was a really big blessing for me growing up. And then like during that journey, my big passion from a young age was to play pro soccer. So that was my obsession while I was in my teenage years. That was it. Like I had nothing else in my life other than play pro soccer. So until 19, that's all I did was train, play, eat, sleep soccer, turn down jobs, turn down all sorts of stuff, family trips. Like I remember my mom and brother went to Cuba for a week. I'm like, no, I have a tournament this weekend. I'm staying home. We lost 10-0 in the first match and we were done. But like those are the sacrifices that when you want to pursue stuff. So I was very driven as a young kid, very like laser focused on achieving that objective. And I was able to do that for a number of years in my early 20s. And, I've taken that same kind of focus and drive into a lot of other aspects of my life. It's also a common theme I've noticed with a lot of other athletes. It's like they take that drive and that ambition from whether it was high school, college, pro level, and it just translates into other areas of life. Like when you have the bug, you have the bug. Like it's just a mindset. And it's always a pleasure to connect with people like that and work with them as clients. So that was, very formative growing up between that, like the sport and then my parents. I ended up losing all my hair to an autoimmune condition when I was just about 17 years old. And that was a real big like kick in the ass. Like, whoa, what just happened? It was an autoimmune condition called alopecia. And that really sent me on a trajectory of like, okay, cool. Let's figure out why this happened. And it's one of the best things that ever happened for me because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if that hadn't happened. So those are kind of like three big scenarios, I guess, or things that shaped me growing up for sure.
Were any of your parents immigrants?
So my dad is Moroccan. My mom was Danish. They
Right.
actually met. So they lived in Paris for 7 years just before I was born.
Right.
And I was joking with them like, it would have made my life soccer wise a lot easier if you like had me in France. But so they were, so they both had immigrated to Canada and then they lived in Toronto and that's where I grew up.
The reason why I ask is because both my parents are immigrants. They immigrated from Egypt, and it's almost identical situation where my dad was kind of the risk taker and my mom was more of the conservative, like let's make sure there's food on the table, let's make sure our bills are paid, all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting because people will immigrate to a new country, they'll see a new opportunity, and two people can have different reactions. Some will be like, okay, this is great, let's make sure that we don't lose it. And the other person might be like, oh, look at all these opportunities, let's jump after every single thing we see. Did you see that dynamic growing up? And do you feel like that may be a reason why they weren't compatible?
I think it was more cultural that they weren't compatible. What was interesting, like in terms of risk, my mom was very, and I actually adopted this to my dismay for a long time, was she racked everything up on credit cards and debt. So we take a trip or we do something and it was all paid for by credit. And so even subconsciously up until my probably early 30s, that's a lot of how I lived as well. So I accumulated a lot of debt over the years because I didn't know how to manage money. I didn't understand it properly. And that was kind of part of my money blueprints for a very, very long time. It was never really about like, we can't afford this or like we have to like be frugal. It was more about we'll just do this. And then it just so happens it was all on credit and so forth. My dad was interesting was because his business at the time, this is back in the early 90s, mid 90s, when people still use cash, like he used to have like stacks of cash in his place. And like he'd keep it under his mattress, like people do. And I just remember him counting bills on the bed. Like, and we would talk about this, right? And we would talk about money very, very matter of fact. And from him, like what I really appreciated was, and I think to be honest, this is where a lot of my mindset came from with this stuff, is there was never lack. It was always, you can create whatever you want. There's more than enough. This amount, like this abundance mentality that he had, even though like, what's interesting is I remember having a conversation with him last year. I never asked him this question. I said, what was your revenue in the business at like when you were at the height of it? And
what
he said
a tough
something
question
like,
to ask your parent.
yeah, he said it was like 2 million. I'm like, really? Shit, that's it? I'm
In
like,
the 90s, that's, I mean, for a small business, not bad.
yeah, but I'm thinking like, in terms of like where my level is at this point in my
Yes.
life. And it's just like at the time you're like, oh my God, like you look up to your
Yeah.
parents in such a way. But anyways, it was just cool to just kind of like see that perspective of like, here's the cash, that mindset of, when you sell stuff and help people out, like you get this in return. And then just seeing, the dichotomy with my mom a little bit. I don't know how much of it was risk tolerance versus risk aversion. I think they were honestly both very similar from that perspective. They would just do stuff. It's just my mom happened to do more of it on credit. My dad was a little more cash based, I think.
I think that's interesting what you mentioned about like this moment. We all have this moment as entrepreneurs where somebody opens up this window where like, oh, anything's possible. Like, oh, like I can do what I want. I can make more money. I can be free of, maybe my location or my time or whatever it might be. What was that moment for you? Was it that moment when you saw your dad counting the cash on the bed? Or was it, a chance where you thought, oh, I become a pro soccer player. Maybe I could do other things too.
I don't know. I think there's many moments. So I remember around like 10, 12, 13, somewhere in that neighborhood, I would just go knocking door to door and I would shine people's shoes. I would like take my shoe polish and like shine their shoes. Because at the time I wanted like baseball and hockey cards. Like that was my big thing at the time. So I had like boxes and I'd like document how much they were worth and all that stuff. So I'd look, okay, if I want to make $40 to go buy some cards, how many shoes do I have to shine? So I'd go knock doors. I would wash cars. In the wintertime, I'd shovel snow. So that was kind of my first forte into entrepreneurship. And then I think it really started hitting me. My first job was actually selling appliances when I was 17 years old at Future Shop, which was then bought by Best Buy. So I was a 17-year-old kid selling washers, dryers, dishwashers, microwaves, and vacuums to families. And it was very interesting because it doesn't really, it's like, how does this even make sense? But it was really cool because I remember the commissions on some of those. I mean, if you're selling 5 appliances to a family, I remember days where I was making like $3,000-$4,000 in commission. And I'm like, this is amazing. And then there were days that were obviously, less so. But I loved that feeling of like, hold on, you're telling me that if I can skill up and help people make a good decision for themselves and get paid this, and like, I'm never going to work for like hourly wages ever again. And that was awesome. I also had a couple of gigs as a bartender, and I remember leaving some nights like $700 cash. I was like, this is incredible. However, you get home at 4 a.m, you smell like smoke because this is when they could smoke in the bars and restaurants still. And after doing that for a summer, I was like, I don't know if I really want to keep doing this. But I think those experiences helped me recognize that I could get paid based on performance and outcomes as opposed to how much time I put in. I've always been very, like, I can tolerate a huge amount of risk, much more than I think a lot of people. For me, to have a fixed salary, like even if it was 150,000, like whatever number, like if I knew this is the most I could ever make, I could not even live like that, to be honest. I would rather know every single day that I can make nothing, but the ceiling was like limitless. And that's driven me my whole life. I'm like, I never want anyone to put a cap on what's possible for me. And this is also why I stopped playing pro soccer, because my fate was not in my hands. I was like at the mercy of my agents and other club presidents, and like you're literally like a pawn being, moved all over the place.
Yeah,
and I didn't like
an
that.
asset for the club. Yeah,
Exactly. Like you're essentially like a glorified employee. And I'm like, that's when I started to recognize, for me, freedom in the sense of choice, like doing what I want, when I want, with whom I want, wherever I want, like that's the most important thing to me. Like I could care less about the money. It's like I want to have the choice to do what I want. And I think that became a very big driving force for everything else afterwards.
I think we have that in common for sure. I have a huge yearning for autonomy. I hate being told what to do from a young age. I just have a hard time with that. And I'm happy to be poor till and get to do what I want, right? And then obviously, that's not going to last forever. You're going to have some ambition and start growing. But I love the fact that you've tried so many different things. I speak to a lot of young people about, they ask me for advice. I want to start a business. How do I know if it's going to work? All this stuff. And even my own family members, like my nieces and nephews. And the question I ask them is like, how do you know if you like pineapple? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I just try it. And it's like, okay, exactly. You have to try. And I love the fact that sometimes you try things and you figure out, okay, I definitely don't want to do that. I don't want to bartend, right? But I like this idea of like making sales and actually making more money the better I do. I like this kind of concept. This is really good advice if you're, under 30 even, and you haven't really explored different jobs, different ideas, different ventures, different ways of life. It's going to inform you, and you get to learn a little bit more about yourself, what you love and what you don't love. So thanks for sharing that. That's a huge point. Health and wellness has been pretty much part of your life, all your life, right? You played professional soccer, and you would think that, as somebody who committed their time and their energy and everything and said no to, Cuban vacations from the age of 10 into your 20s playing soccer, it must have been pretty shocking for you to hear that there's something about you that's unhealthy and you're losing your hair, right? Like, I'm an athlete. What are you talking about? All I do is exercise and, watch what I do and all that kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit about like that experience did for you in terms of like, I can do all the right things and still something can happen.
Well, I think it's like you do the best you can with what you know at the time. So for me, I thought I was fit, but I didn't know the distinction between fit and not healthy. So I was like, oh, I can run and I can play on a soccer pitch, but apparently I'm not really healthy. And it's like health and fitness are not the same. And
I want you
that
to
was
just,
kinda like,
sorry, but like, what's the difference? Like most people think of somebody who exercises every day, they got to be healthy.
yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a marker of health for sure. But if you look under the hood, someone could have like high inflammatory markers, or they could be way too acidic. Or in my case, like the thing is, when you're a teenager, you can get away with like Grand Theft Auto. Like you can eat whatever you want, you can do whatever you want, and your body's like bouncing back. And I remember when I was coaching with the men's soccer program at the University of Toronto, which was my alma mater. I remember working with these guys, and like there was a McDonald's across from the stadium. And when I was their age, I would go to McDonald's before a game. Like I'm like, this was the level of like, I didn't know anything about nutrition. I thought I could just do that because it didn't hinder my performance. And then started to see like from their perspective, like, oh yeah, they're coming into practice with gummy bears and like eating all sorts of junk. So, that stuff you can get away with for a moment, but it catches up with you. For me, it caught up with me a lot sooner than most people. And I think part of that was because my body was just a toxic wasteland from a very young age. I had a lot of antibiotics when I was young, vaccinations, the whole bit. So I had this like perfect storm. And I guess based on my constitution, maybe my immune system was just like, dude, like this is too much. So in my case, on the surface, I wasn't aware of it. But when I started to learn about this stuff, so I lost my hair at 17. We started going to all sorts of doctors and specialists. No one really had any answers. And then 8 years later, when I finished playing soccer, I came back and went to school for nutrition. So I actually did my undergrad in kinesiology, but I was playing pro soccer. And just to give you a sense of like how much I didn't know, I would play, we'd have a game on the weekend. I'd start my day with 3 Nutella crepes. Like that was my pre-match meal, was 3 crepes with Nutella. I'm thinking like, this is normal. I'm like, maybe if I have all this Nutella, it'll be good for me. Every single day when I was living in France where I was playing, I'd have a whole baguette, like pasta, cream sauces, all this kind of stuff. It wasn't even a thought. And I'm like, wow. But what was interesting that I only realized when I was about 25, when I went back to school for nutrition, was like, oh, so a lot of these foods may have been part of the problem. And then I started to recognize, as I started making changes to my diet, I started having way more energy. For me, that was the biggest shift, like honestly, in my life. Because for what I didn't realize up until that point was I was sleeping 50% of my life, like 12 hours a day between nighttime and maybe a 2-hour nap. I remember like when I was at the University of Toronto, I remember as a student, I would go study after school. I'd go to the library, and every single time I'd fall asleep in the cubicle as I'm studying. And I remember like drool on my notes and stuff like that. And I think back to that, I'm like, man, I was just exhausted all the time. And I later realized, at least in my case, that fatigue, like that level of fatigue, and I thought it was just because I was active, but the reality is my body was just fighting all this stuff all the time. So I started to recognize that low energy in that fashion is a warning sign that something far more dangerous is brewing underneath the surface. And I had no clue about that until I started to learn about how the body works and nutrition and physiology. And when I cleaned things up, not only did I regrow my hair in the space of about 2 to 3 months, but my energy in about 7 days, I was bouncing out of bed after 6 hours of sleep. And it was almost like I was in a different universe. I was like, where am I? Like, this is crazy. And that was such an eye-opening experience for me that I just had to start sharing this. And I wrote my first book that eventually became a published book, but 9 years later, in the back of nutrition school. I'm literally in the back of class writing this out because I'm like, I don't know what this is going to look like, but I have to start sharing this with people because it transformed me in such a huge way. And at the time, I'm like, I played pro soccer. I went to one of the top 20 schools in the world for kinesiology. If I didn't know this stuff, like 8 billion other people don't know this. And that became a really big kind of fire under my butt to want to share everything I possibly knew.
That's incredible. It sounds very much like you're passionate about this topic because it affected you personally, but you're not only, passionate about health, you're also passionate about helping people that are in the health industry. Your business Healthpreneur helps coach people that are in businesses that deal with health, trainers, nutritionists, people that are even in, the natural sciences, all that kind of stuff. So one of the things I want to talk about is I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that are in the health industry, and I feel like there's like a common thread where they're all kind of struggling around the 6-figure mark, where they just have a hard time breaking through. I want to ask you, what is the common thread do you find when you work with these professionals? Why are they hitting that ceiling? Is it something that they believe? Is it something that they're not doing? What's happening here?
So 0 to 1 is very hard. And I say 0 to 1 is like, it can be 0 to 100,000, 0 to a million. Peter Thiel has a great book called 0 to 1, and he's like one of the co-founders of PayPal. But the idea is like, the hard part about that journey is that you have to learn everything. Like it took me 7 years to make my first $1 million in business. And then when I started Healthpreneur, I made my first million in this business in 7 weeks. And that's because I had 13 years of experience prior to that. And I had, skills and so forth. The challenge is like when you're starting, you have to learn everything. I mean, you have to learn about sales and marketing. You have to learn about, in some cases online, you have to learn about the tech, even though it's maybe not the most important thing, you still have to learn the basics. I remember when I was first starting my business online in 2005, sending out email newsletters, and it was like, the subject line was April newsletter. I'm like, I would never send out an email subject like that, but at the time you don't know. Actually, my best subject line of all time was if you ever forget to put a subject line in, sometimes it says like brackets, no subject. That's like the best open rate of all time. So the challenge is you have to learn all these skills, and it's like learning a foreign language. And at the same time, you have to develop as an individual tremendously, because the thing that business, it's like a magnifying glass on your own, on your own shit. Like if you have limiting beliefs, or you have a fear of putting yourself out there, or you don't want to send too many emails or post too often, all of these are going to get magnified. And you spend so much time in your head and doubt and worry. You go through this whole emotional roller coaster, and it's a really tough journey from 0 to 1. And I think trying to bring all that together, and honestly, in a lot of cases, for most businesses, you might be by yourself from 0 to 250,000 in revenue. And maybe you have an assistant, maybe you have someone else as you grow from there. But a lot of it is like, man, you just got to do everything. And I think it's really hard. So you're kind of like sweeping the floors, painting the walls. Like the analogy that I give, because I love aviation, is you're the CEO of the airline, you're the pilot, you're the flight attendant, you're the maintenance crew, and you're the person who's like welcoming the airplane back into the gate. You're doing all of it. And it's incredible. And that's why I think so few businesses statistically last beyond 5 years. So fundamentally, I think it's a skill gap. Like there's two big things. One is if we're super busy doing all this stuff and we're not where we want to be, it's we're doing the wrong stuff. And that's usually a reflection of the fact that we don't know what to do instead, or we don't have the right skills. And if we can start to get mentorship and guidance to be like, okay, well, what do I do? How do I do it properly? And then do it over and over and over again to build the skill, that's how we can start to move forward a lot faster.
I definitely agree that one of the cheat codes to get some traction, to get beyond a barrier, is to get help from somebody who's done it before. Like a lot of people resist this. They think that having a coach or getting a mentor or something like that is for people that are weak or people that can't figure it out on their own or whatever it might be. But I was one of those people, honestly. And then about a decade ago, I realized, why am I doing this on hard mode? Like, why don't I just ask for some help? And, this person's a few steps ahead of me. Let me, get on a call with them. Let me hire this person for a few hours, whatever. And it's incredible because you're in the weeds in your business, as you know, and it's so hard for you to ask yourself the right questions. And it's good just to have somebody outside of you to be like, have you thought about this? And it's like, oh, well, actually I didn't. So what are some of the primary questions you like to ask your maybe a new client, a new entrepreneur that you meet maybe at a conference or something? You're like, hey, I'm really struggling, Yuri. My business is doing XYZ. What are some of the questions you like to ask first?
So kind of piggybacking on your previous question, I think one of the biggest things that I see that's difficult is product market fit, right? So someone has an idea, whether it's a course or a coaching offer or whatever, to make that work, like you have to give it time. And some people jump ship too soon because it's a little bit difficult. Your business wants boring, but you as an individual want novelty. And that's kind of the thing as an entrepreneur. It's like the very thing that is our superpower also becomes our Achilles heel. So we want all this change and new things to be exciting. It's like, get a hobby if you want exciting. Like your business should be very boring and do the same thing over and over again. So I think part of the issue is when I'm talking to someone, I want to get a sense of their business. And as soon as they start using plural around things like program or course, I have a couple courses or I have a couple programs, right away I'm like, I know you're struggling. Because very few people that I know who've achieved massive success have done so by doing like offering 10 courses. And this was the mistake that I made when I came online, is like I was just creating new stuff all the time. With Healthpreneur, we had one offer for 7 years. That was it, because I learned the mistakes of complexity. So when I'm talking with someone, I want to get a sense of, okay, naturally, like, what you do, who you serve, et cetera. A lot of times, because I'm helping health professionals, it's like, yeah, like, I'm a naturopath. I help a lot of different things. I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to piece the picture together. They're not a specialist. So generally, in a brick and mortar, for instance, people will fall into their lap from word of mouth, foot traffic, et cetera. But when you come online, you don't have that luxury. Like no one knows you exist. So you have to really narrow down to become a specialist in one specific condition, whether it's migraines or IBS or acne or whatever it is, because now you can actually proactively market yourself with a message that pierces through the noise. And now you get seen as the expert in that one area. And then also on the delivery, it makes it a lot easier. So that's one of the biggest things I find in conversations is a lot of people are generalists, at least in our space, health experts. But the other thing too is a lot of people, especially now. So when I came online in 2005, I started off, my goal was to live the laptop lifestyle, sell ebooks, $47, chill by the pool. It didn't happen. And it still doesn't happen. I see a lot of people talk about passive income. They're busy with something. They want to create a second source of income. And I'm like, passive income? ? Just to be clear, this is not like some little side hustle. This is like a major endeavor. This is like bringing a child into the world. There's no like passive child rearing. And I think there's this mindset around, I can just do some stuff online, like put up a course, sell it for $200. Yeah, people will definitely go to my website and hit the buy now button. No, it's not going to happen. It's very, very hard, even if people knew who you were, to get the vast majority of people to go to your website, go through a sales page and click the buy now button. Unless you have a tremendous amount of trust with your audience, like the percentage of conversions is going to be in the neighborhood of 1% to 3%. And then obviously you have other, strategies like webinars, and different things like that. But I think a lot of people just don't even understand what they're getting into. They think it's going to be a lot easier than it really is. And I tell people, I'm like, building an online business is one of the most challenging types of business you can build because no one knows you exist. You have to stand out amongst the noise. There's a tremendous lack of trust in the marketplace right now, and have fun with that. With that said, you can crack the code for sure. And it will be the most worthwhile thing you ever do, because if you want time and location freedom, if you want autonomy, there's nothing else that can provide that in this type of format, but it's hard. And so I think just resetting expectations is what I end up doing for a lot of people is, through questioning, just get them to recognize that it would just be a lot easier to just keep seeing patients all day long. Why even do this, right? Really get them to question their motivations, because they have to have that motivation, because there will be moments, many moments where you're like, why am I doing this? This is too hard. I'm just going to throw in the towel. But in those moments you want to give up, you have to remember why you started. And I think if you're just after passive income, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned this whole myth of passive income, because I recently went to a conference, really amazing conference, but the majority of the audience were kind of digital nomad people chasing that passive income.
Yeah.
And I was just having side conversations with them. I was trying to actually just gather intel to know how to tweak my talk that I'll be giving later in the day. And what I just kind of wanted to say to them is instead of you just living this lifestyle where you're struggling financially, you're moving to a country so the cost of living is much cheaper, you're missing your family and friends, or you're not really winning in your business, why don't you just take it seriously, work hard, and then not work for 6 weeks out of the year and enjoy the beach. Like,
Yeah.
how about
Like,
that idea?
yeah, you could,
You
I
know?
mean, how many people do we know like have moved to Bali to live like the digital nomad lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Or like go to New York, raise your standards.
Yeah, if you can make
right?
it there, you can make it anywhere. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
or Sydney or,
And
or
that's
wherever,
why I did.
right?
I moved to New York when I became a full-time entrepreneur, not because I was like, oh, this is where I'm gonna make all the money. I
Yeah.
just knew everybody was chasing their dream in New York, and I wanted to be around that energy. I wanted to be a part of that scene. I knew I was going to meet some people that are doing interesting things. I was so poor in New York. Like I was going to wine and cheese events just to, have dinner, right? But I got so much other pieces of value from that experience. So I love the fact that you're questioning this kind of idea and giving them some other things to consider, because you're going to spend the time anyway to build the business. You're going to make the effort. You're going to go through the whole emotional anguish of it all. You might as well
Yeah.
go all in. Why are you trying to like make this, happen with like 10 hours of work a week? Like it doesn't really compute in the real world. And I love the idea of focus, just focusing on one product. We've heard so many stories, Steve Jobs cutting all the Apple products when he came back to Apple and all that. But it allows you to really create a better, valuable product when you just have one to focus on, which is a great tip. I love that.
But again, I share a lot of this because I made so many of these mistakes. Like I didn't know better when I started my business. I thought, well, if I could create a lot of stuff that will cast a wider net and more people would want it. Only to realize that when you have 100 SKUs, whether it was courses, supplements, or whatever that we had, you can't optimize all that stuff. And it's like, you're not going to help everyone anyways. So like, you might as well focus on one thing and drill as deep as you possibly can. And again, in our space, I was telling my clients on Monday, as an example, like there's 33 million Americans who suffer with migraines, like several times a week. You couldn't even live 10 lifetimes and serve half of them. Like the markets that our people are serving are so big that even if they just did one thing to that one single target market, they could build 8 and 9-figure businesses in this lifetime. But the challenge, they run into roadblocks. Like for instance, people aren't buying their stuff, whether that's from a website or if they're coaching and charging higher ticket and they're on the phone with people are saying, no, it's too expensive. And they think, well, now I have to offer something lower price to appease those people. It's like, no, you just have to skill up. So it's like, drill deep, become as good as you possibly can, do the one thing and understand that with that one thing and that one thing alone, you have like no idea how many millions of dollars per month you could generate from or in the service of this market. And it's not going to come from like this and like this whole ascension funnel of like $7 and tripwires and upsell flows. I did all of that in my previous business. The moment where I was like, I'm never doing this again, we had a cookbook that we were launching many years ago. And it was a free plus shipping offer. We've seen those, right? So you pay nothing except for the shipping, and then you go through this whole upsell sequence. So we had 9 different upsell flows. So like 9 different possible pathways after the checkout page. Each one had 4 different upsells or different variations of pricing and kind of order. And all we were trying to do was increase the average order value from $18 to $22. I'm like, what am I doing here? It's just crazy. I would rather build the skill of having a conversation with someone, like sell them the ultimate thing at a higher price. It's just so much easier. So just anyways, I share all this stuff from like the lessons and the mistakes and obviously the wins that I've had to hopefully, help others, avoid the pitfalls.
I love it. I love it because one of the things that sells well online are like tools and strategies that just seem easy. So like the common person be like, oh, that sounds easy. Like, okay, I could do that. And we want to believe it's that easy. So therefore we buy it, right? But the truth of the matter is that like, it's not as simple as people are just going to like go through and click and put in their credit card nice and easy. And one of the things I like to mention to people that do believe it's that easy is how often do you actually buy these things? Like once every 3 years or something? It's not that common, right? So, and the reason why it's not that common is because, like you mentioned, you need to build a relationship with people. You need to build trust. You need to become the expert in that niche that you're in. So people, when they are frustrated, they're not going to go shopping around. They're going to come back to you. So when it comes to that long-term thinking, how do you help an entrepreneur in your space to think, hey, you're building a brand, you're building a business that's going to stay here for decades to come. Let's like not make, short-term bets that maybe are going to hurt us later on. How do you marry that with, I got to pay the bills?
Well, I think it's what you just mentioned. I I really do think everyone should be setting longer runways. If your goal is just focusing on what do I have to do this week to make money, you're going to make very different decisions than I'm building an empire that's going to last, generations. So, but I get it, like, because I've been in both sides, right? So you have to pay the bills, and then maybe even as your company grows, you've got payroll and other commitments, right? It's like new levels, new devils. I do think it's a very important skill to be able to create revenue for the business, because revenue is like, they say cash is king, whatever. Revenue, when a company is looking at investing in a company, or an investment firm is looking at investing in a company, they won't even consider a company unless you have large revenue as a starting point, before they even look at some of the other metrics. You have to become very good at generating revenue, because if you are in a pinch, what can you do? Like, can you run some type of campaign? Can you pick up the phone? You have to get good, whether it's the marketing, the sales, both combined. Because if you are in a pinch, you never want to be without ideas of how you can generate revenue. That's a skill you can build, and it obviously comes with time in the trenches. But if you don't have that time, well, you have to make up in time what you lack in skill. And if you don't have the money, you also have to make up in time what you lack in money. But honestly, when I hired my first coach, which was 3 years too late, it was still the best decision I ever made, because it was $18,000. That was more money than I made in my previous year in business. I didn't have the money. I took it on 2 credit cards. I split up the payment, and I didn't know how to make. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I still remember the pit in my stomach, but I remember the voice in my head, and the voice in my head was, I'm going to make this work no matter what. And it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever felt this, where you kind of like, you're going through the motions, and then all of a sudden you set a new goal, like a new objective, or you're like thrown into the pool and now you have to swim. And there's a whole new level of fire like inside of you, that it's like, all right, now we're going. Like, it was like we were going a little bit, but like now we're going. And I don't think a lot of people have that. I do think there's a tremendous amount of value from being in those places of desperation, because a lot of motivation and inspiration come from those times where you're like, I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm going to figure out a way to make it happen. So I'm not a huge fan of taking outside capital. I think it makes you lazy. I think it kills creativity. I think there's a tremendous amount of value in living poor, even as you grow, because it forces you to continually innovate and create. But again, without going horizontally wide, but really thinking about, how do we optimize this? How do we make this better? Just as an example, we split tested a new pre-headline on a landing page this past week. We doubled the conversions just by changing the pre-headline. Now, if we had spread ourselves too thin by going multiple products wide, we probably would not even thought about that, because now we're having to juggle all these different balls. So getting back to your question, you have to learn the skill of sales and marketing. Like, you have to become good at promoting, whether it's through social or ads or email campaigns, whatever it is. The second thing, because like, again, if you're in a pinch and you can't make money, you're kind of screwed. Along those lines, I really do believe, and again, this is going to be more for kind of like the service-based entrepreneurs. If you can go high ticket right away, you have way more wiggle room. So if you have 10 conversations with someone over Zoom to offer a higher ticket service, like a coaching program, the likelihood that one of them will say yes isn't too far out of, like, that's kind of in the realm of possibility, even if you're not that great at sales. But to create a sales page and have the copywriting chops to even write that, and then sell something for even 1/100th of the price and expecting 10% of people to buy that is delusional. It is so much easier to get better at having a conversation with someone to sell a $5,000 product or program than it is to sell a $50 product to the masses who are never going to buy. So learning the art of influence, of persuasion, of sales. Most entrepreneurs, regardless of their industry, will tell you that sales is one of the most important skills you can develop. So I think that's where it starts. And then the second thing is doing whatever you can to think long-term, because if you think long-term, you will make better decisions and you will avoid doing things that will kill your reputation. I mean, like, one of the superpowers that I have with Healthpreneur is I'm the only person in our space who's been around since 2005. I don't have negative reviews. I mean, I'm not perfect, obviously, but like, there's no nonsense all over the internet about Yuri Elkaim. Like, it's for the most part very positive. That goes a very, very long way. And it takes a long time to build that, but it also takes 1 second to screw it all up. So when you have a longer term horizon, so for instance, for us, we're looking to build $1 billion, or we want to help 1 billion people transform their lives. and fundamentally disrupt the sick care system. And I want this company to be around beyond my lifetime. And so for the most part, I'm trying to make decisions for the future while also having the infrastructure to take care of now. It doesn't happen right away, but like, again, if the vision is longer term, generally on the average, you're making decisions that will support that vision. And also it attracts better people. It attracts better team members who eventually want to be part of that. And it also attracts better customers and clients who align with that vision or that ethos, as opposed to just make money or, get this type of outcome. So for me, that's been my approach. And that's something I really, encourage my clients to think about as well. Is like, just think about this, what this could look like 5 years down the road. Like, it's going to be challenging over the next couple of months, but 5 years, you're going to look back on this, you'll be like, man, what a great story this will be to tell.
I love the fact that you mentioned, this, introducing this idea. Why don't you get on a call with people? Why don't you do a webinar? If you do 10 conversations a week, you're going to have a healthy business just because you're going to learn more about your customers. You're going to learn what they want. You're going to learn what they need. You're going to be able to solve more problems for them. I even think if you're selling a product, but especially a high ticket product, and coaching is a great example of this. And I think the reason why, like you mentioned, the conversions are so much better than like send them to a landing page and hopefully they buy. You're building trust. You're building a chance to get to know each other in that conversation, in that 30 minutes, in that 45 minutes, where they can start to realize, okay, this person has their best interest in mind. I may want to give them a shot. And most people don't want to shop around. Most people want to just make a decision and stop worrying about this. And they'll just say, hey, okay, let's do it and let's see what happens. So it's actually giving you a better chance. One of the things I believe in is that I think that some of the best people at building trust with their audience are comedians, like stand-up comedians. And people forget that Joe Rogan is a comedian. Like, he's a stand-up comedian. And has he get Netflix specials? Because he has an audience. Netflix doesn't need to be sold on Joe Rogan. They already know he's great because they see him on his podcast all the time, right? Or, Mark Maron. Mark Maron, how did he get that part in Joker, right? He's a stand-up comedian, but the producers, the people that are in the industry, they know that he has an audience. He knows that he draws a crowd. Like, he doesn't have to prove himself anymore because he's built trust with the people that are making the decision to transact with him. So I think it's a good point. Like, where sometimes we just want to hide behind our screens and just not really interact with our customers, but you're actually making things harder for yourself. You can actually excel a lot faster if you just do the opposite and talk to as many people as possible. I love that.
There was just this, like, I can't remember the company's name. They're a Canadian company. They started doing weighted blankets, and it was a seasonal business, which is interesting. So I remember seeing this interview with them a little while ago, and so they sold blankets on the internet, and two co-founders, and they're talking about how they just started calling all of their customers. Like, hey, what do you like? What could be better? Tell me about yourself. They called every single one of their customers, and then they developed pillows and mattresses and so forth. And they're talking about when they opened up one of their flagship stores, they actually had a lineup that was like around in the shopping mall, right beside, I think it was like Casper Mattresses or one of the bigger mattress companies in the mall. That store was like empty, and this store had like one of the biggest lineups for a new opening they'd ever seen. And a large part of their success was the fact that for a product-based business, like, who goes to buy a mattress somewhere and then the founders call them? Like, these guys were just like, we're calling everyone. And then they were acquired by one of the biggest companies in Canada called Sleep Country Canada, bought out by them a couple of years ago. And it's just such a great example of kind of doing a little bit of a different thing than what most people do. Like, no one's too cool for school. You'll get so much intel from talking to your customers. And especially in a product-based business, which can be typically more detached, I thought it was such a beautiful journey, or a beautiful example of like what can happen with that.
I love that, man. That's a good example because there's so much you can learn by just talking to your customers. I'm on my second screen here. I'm looking at your website, healthpreneurgroup.com. I recommend those who are listening, watching, to check it out. But I want to particularly drill into, on your menu, you got something called the Core 10. And we're not going to go through all 10, but there's a few here I want to touch on because I think those who are listening are going to love it. And they're the 10 principles that underpin the most successful health businesses I've helped over the years, is the subheadline here. But this applies to any business, honestly, the things that you share here. There's a few here I want to touch on. Your success is determined by your systems, number 4 of 10. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, realistically, your success is determined by a few more things. But generally, like, if you have no systems, you have no leverage, you have no predictability, everything is relying on your time and effort and manual grind. I'll use Starbucks as an example. So Starbucks, if you go get a drink in your local town and that's what your drink is, if you go halfway across the world and you're thinking like, hey, I'd love to have this drink, whether it's a latte or whatever it is, you're thinking to yourself, well, I could go to that cafe that I've never been to, which means increased uncertainty. And humans generally want to avoid making the wrong decision. So we look at Starbucks and like, hold on, if I go to Starbucks, even though I'm halfway across the world, I know if I order that latte, it'll be more or less the same. And that's a system, right? There's a system, there's a process for how they make their drinks. Are they the best coffee? Probably not. But even if you look at the behind the counter, when they scoop ice, there are 3 different scoops. Like light ice has a different size scoop than normal ice. That's a very simple thought process to say, instead of us just guessing how much ice, why don't we systemize it? So across every store, light ice is filled up to whatever the level is, 2 ounces, 3 ounces. That's the level of thinking that I think most entrepreneurs can benefit from. And it's also like from a service perspective is how do we productize our service? And when I say service, I literally mean everything you do in your business. So if you send out an email, how do you send out an email? If you coach clients, how do you coach clients? If you do a group coaching call, how do you run a group coaching call? Like there are systems or processes that can be documented for how you start the Zoom meeting. Okay, start the Zoom meeting. Everyone's muted, cameras on. First thing, get everyone to share a win inside the chat. These are all systems that anyone else can then run. So like in our business, we have about 15 coaches aside from myself. We have about 45 coaching calls per week. I don't do all the coaching calls. I do 3 of them. And we have systems for how our other coaches run their calls. Now we allow them to do work their magic, but there's also a very similar process. And what that allows me to do is step out of the business so that even if I'm on vacation or wherever I am, our clients don't need me. Like our clients can still make progress. So that's like an example, or like even on the acquisition front, if you're relying on DMing every single person to bring people into your world, cool, like that can work. But if you have a system, for instance, in our case, we call it a perfect client pipeline. It's kind of like an automated webinar funnel. Like right now, as we're having this interview, people are watching my webinar. I'm not involved in that. I created it once. I set up the system, the asset itself, and now it runs on autopilot on my behalf. And that's leverage. And a lot of people, especially service-based providers, don't have the leverage. They work, they get paid for their time. If they don't work, they don't get paid. And their clients or patients don't get helped. So systems are huge, massive.
Love it. Not only does it make a better business and help you scale and grow, it actually adds a lot of value to the business because I know this firsthand. I grew Webinar Ninja for 10 years, recently got acquired by ProProfs, but somewhere around year 5, somebody gave me the advice, you need to start documenting all your procedures and systems. How do you deploy code? How do you comment code? How does your customer service agent deal with a refund? It's like, oh, okay. So like I just got some of the team members to start writing down in Google Docs what they do every day. Then we refined it and we had a playbook. And then eventually before we, were in due diligence and in the process of selling, we documented everything, videos, text of every single procedure. And this allowed us to actually have a pretty strong demand on our asking price because they can just go ahead and implement all this stuff. And they don't need like a long vesting period. They're like, oh, this is easy. You just told us exactly what to do. If I have any questions, I could just search the doc. If I don't understand how something is done, I can watch a video. It was like so easy for them. And this is a company that's acquired a lot of big companies. So they're like, this is great. Like, and it made my life so much easier because anybody who's ever sold a business knows that due diligence is like the worst process ever. And, they learn about everything about your business, your underwear size, everything, right? So that made it so much easier because you're just transparently showing your business. So it not only makes your business run smoothly and grow and scale, but it actually, you're investing in the value of the actual business when you get acquired. And we, like Rob Walling, my buddy at Microconf says, we all sell eventually. At some point, we're going to sell that business. Can't do it forever. Another one on your core 10 that I want to get into that just hit me when I read it is you can dominate your market by being just a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm very opinionated about this. I don't know about you, Omar, but like very few businesses impress me. Like I'm talking about like airlines, hotels, restaurants. Like you go to a restaurant. I remember, so I was taking my son to a soccer game a couple weeks ago, and we get out of the stadium. He wanted some food, so we go to this food truck, and it's empanadas, right? So they're selling empanadas, and like you can see them. They're in a little heating thingamajig. He pulls them out, puts them in a bag and gives it to us. And then we obviously pay by credit card. And then it's 18, 20, or 25% tip. And I'm like, are you for real? Like, I'm not tipping you anything. Like, I can't stand this, like, I just did the very thing that I'm just supposed to do in business, and I'm expecting a 25% tip. I think that's an example of how, like, out of whack expectations have become for such low level service. That would be like me having a coaching call with all of my clients, and every single time after Zoom being like, hey, do you want to leave a tip? You can leave 15, 20. I'm like, it's just absurd.
I'm
Tipping
convinced
aside, I
that
can go on.
somebody in their industry told them that was a good idea. Like the whole tripwire thing, and like we have an online business. Somebody in like the retail business came to them and come to my event and like buy my program and told them, hey, just swing the iPad and you're gonna make whatever X percent every single time. And like, I'm sure something happened like that.
I don't know, like in Australia, everything is built into the price, which is nice, and tipping is not as outrageous as it is here. But that aside, the vast majority of basic service, like if you go to a restaurant, like it's just, you go to the bathroom, it's disgusting. I remember going to the grocery store the other week and I walked into the bathroom and I'm like, this is disgusting. Yeah. And I was actually interesting kind of massage franchise thing a couple months ago in Scottsdale. And I actually shot an Instagram story about their bathroom. I said, this is one of the cleanest bathrooms I've ever been to. And that tells me a lot of the ownership of this place. When I was at a donut shop in Honolulu last summer, one of the nicest bathrooms I've ever been in. And it's a reflection of the standard of the owner, which is it's a reflection of their philosophy. Like, we give a shit, like the small details matter. I think that is missing to a level that is epidemic in our society, where people are phoning it in. We get dozens upon dozens of resumes of people applying to work with us, like team members on a weekly basis. And we have, one of the first things we have them do is a test project relative to the role. And I'd say about 70% of people who submit the test project, they literally phone it in with ChatGPT. You don't even change the formatting. Like, so ChatGPT, I can smell it. And this is, like, I think one of the biggest problems and the biggest opportunity is that most people in general are very average and their standards are low. They have a very low, like, the way they live their life is just like, it's so subpar. And in terms of
they just enough.
It's just enough. Exactly. And the businesses are a representation of that. And so you as a business owner going a little bit above, like, I'm not talking about like rolling out the red carpet. I'm talking about just being a little bit better, being a little bit more intentional. Like, you're in a category of one. Like, it's so easy because most people are just so bad.
A few things come to mind when you talk about this. First thing is, one of my favorite autobiographies is Kitchen Confidential by the late Anthony Bourdain. And he actually recommends that when you go into a restaurant, before you order, go into the bathroom. If the bathroom is not tidy and clean, don't eat there, because the person doesn't take pride in the bathroom. You think that either the public bathroom is dirty. What do you think the kitchen's going to be like? So that's very interesting. The other thing is, I did a whole podcast episode on this topic. I highly recommend every entrepreneur to visit Japan, because Japan gets this right. Their service quality is like way above the rest of the world, and everything is so organized and so clean. I always say that the Japanese, they must think we're animals when they go visit us in our countries. You know, like, they must. It's absolutely stunningly clean in the bathroom at the train station. Like, it's ridiculous how good the standard is, and it's because it's part of their culture and their pride. And the funny thing is that they also are a generous kind of a society. One of the things that is kind of fascinating about Japan, I think is interesting, is that they're one of the countries that when they got rich, they didn't get fat, which is interesting. Like, they still are thinking about their health, they're thinking about not overeating, thinking about the society as a whole. Anyway, my recommendation to anyone listening, go to Japan. You're going to be really, it's an educational experience for us as entrepreneurs. But lastly, I find that this is, in everything that we do in business, that the bar is quite low, and you could just do a little things to differentiate. One of the things that I did was I realized I need to be a better public speaker on stages when I go speak at conferences. I got some training. I worked with Michael and Amy Poor, our Heroic Public Speaking. They're amazing. And one of the things they told me first was like, listen, you're going to make very small improvements because you're just getting started. But that small improvement is going to be so much better because most people the bar is really low. They're not used to somebody getting up on stage and being prepared and not small talking and say, how's everybody doing today? Good. It's great to be here in Chicago. Like, all that is just filler. And it was just amazing when I had that first experience after being trained. This is like a decade ago, but it was like being trained and then getting on stage and just doing my set, doing my 20-minute talk.
Yeah.
So many people came back to me like, that was amazing. Like, how much training have you done? This is incredible. Who taught you how to do that? I was just like, I didn't even feel like I was that much better, but because the bar is so low, just doing a little bit better, like you mentioned, just a little bit better, is it going to differentiate you? Is going to allow people to feel like you're somebody special? It's going to make it easier for to market yourself. So I love that. And you kind of touched on this a moment ago, and I want to get into number 9 here on the list. That's on the core 10, which is business growth always follows personal growth. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people coming into work with us, I say, and working with us isn't inexpensive, but it's also not expensive relative to what they get in return. I say, even if you make $0, like even if you made nothing in your first year working with us, it would still be the best investment you ever make. And I can guarantee that. And the reason I say that is because I've seen thousands of times who you become a year from now in this process. You become not just a better entrepreneur, but a better human. You'll be a better parent, a better spouse. You'll be a better communicator. You'll be a better version of yourself. You'll step into your power. You'll feel more confident in your skin, all this other stuff. And your business follows that. It's almost like you are the tugboat and the business is the cruise ship. And the more horsepower you can build you can put into the tugboat, the bigger the ship you can move. And so we are the tugboats, and the only way we can move the ship is by becoming better as individuals, because the business only grows to the extent that you do. And this is something else that I think I don't know if a lot of people recognize this, but some entrepreneurs, they're happy from like 0 to 3 million, right? They like to start up and then they want to jump onto something else. But what I've recognized, and there's nothing wrong with that, but what I've recognized is, like, for me personally, I do not enjoy doing that, because I've recognized, I'm like, okay, I'm getting to a point, like I'm getting to my pain threshold. I'm getting to my pain line and I don't like this. Cool. So I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to do something else. And then in that something else, I'm also going to get to the same point and hit that same pain line, not growing. So I made a very conscious decision a while ago to say, you know what? I know I'm going to hit these ceilings, and I know it's me. It's 100% me. And I'm going to work through growing through that, because that's where all the opportunity is. And I tell our clients, I'm like, humans are your biggest asset and or your biggest liability. That means the clients you work with, the customers you serve, the ability to communicate with them or to understand what triggers you so you don't freak out on them, or you don't answer like an asshole, or whatever it is, or team members, the ability to have hard conversations or the inability to have hard conversations will determine how fast you grow. In my first business, we had 2 different people that I can think of. They were probably on our team for 2 years because I was avoiding having a hard conversation with them to let them go. You know, we all want to be loved by everyone and whatever, but I think I have recognized that for me, for our business to go where it wants to go, I'm like, I have to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And I've reframed that to be like, the more uncomfortable thing is not having the conversation, because I'm going to be more frustrated. That person's not going to know where they stand, and performance is going to slip. So that is probably a growth that I probably wouldn't have had if I got to my pain threshold and just said, you know what, I'm going to do something else. So that's an example of how we have to grow through this. Another great example is sales. Like, I think selling is, as I mentioned before, one of the most amazing skills we can all develop. And it's something that we help our clients with, who are health professionals, not sales professionals, very extensively, because they have this amazing ability to help people, but they can't communicate that in a way where they feel confident a lot of times to charge premium prices for a health service. And working with them and helping them really develop that skill and helping them recognize that it's them, it's not the words. Like, when you present your price and then have to explain why it's priced the way it is, even before the prospect said anything, what's that all about, right? It's like, where do we have to work internally to really work through that so you can confidently say, here's what it is, and just close your mouth. And so in every aspect of your business, like, your business grows to the extent that you do. And the other thing too is that your strength will become the business's weakness. And so if you're great at marketing, your ability to find a different marketer eventually, a director, whatever, will be the biggest unlock for you, because you will probably want to control everything. And I say this because that's me. that has been me. Until you're able to release yourself from that position or from that role, you will continue to be the bottleneck in the business in that specific department. So it always comes back to us. Just so fascinating to be able to work through that. And I think other than having kids and maybe a really horrible health journey, building a business is the most incredible spiritual journey you can ever go on in terms of your own personal growth. It's just such an amazing blessing.
It's definitely a hero's journey. That's for sure. I want to wrap up with a few selfishly personal questions. Some things that I want to learn, some things I want to get from Yuri in this conversation. What was one of the most unconventional pieces of advice that you've received in your journey in entrepreneurship?
Oh, unconventional. I used to work with Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach, who's one of the most incredible humans. And I remember, he didn't say this to me directly, but I was obviously in a workshop with him, and he said, in order to make more, you have to work less. And at the time, I was like busted my chops in my business, like doing everything.
It goes against everything that we're taught. Work hard, that's how you get ahead.
Yeah. And it was at the time, it was the perfect, like where I was in the journey, it was perfect to work with them at that time. And it just got me thinking like, man, like, what does that even look like? And then I started to think a little bit differently over time. So I'd say that's probably one of the most pivotal, at least that I can think of, pieces of unconventional advice.
Love it. Do you still play soccer recreationally?
With my kids. For me, it's kind of like the Mercedes-Benz slogan, like it's the best or nothing. I'm kind of like that with sports or soccer. I'm like, I'm not playing in a men's league with guys showing up that are 100 pounds overweight and they're going to tear their ACL because they're out of shape and they go for a smoke after the game. I play with the kids, and thankfully they're at a level now where it's a fun challenge.
You can give me some advice here, okay? So I've been playing basketball all my life, played pretty high level when I was in university, and I'm playing regularly now because I'm training for the World Master Games in Switzerland. So one of my challenges is that my mind and what I think I can do is not the same place my body is. My body often says nope. And I often just tell myself, well, I got to train more. I got to just, get in better shape. Maybe I got to lose a couple kilos and I'll be able to have a little bit more airtime. Am I delusional? Do I need to just come to terms with this and just enjoy the game as it is? What do I do, Yuri? Help me.
I don't know, man. Like I want to give you like props on that, because I really do think like I still haven't achieved my best fitness potential. And I think a lot of us can as we get older. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is recovery time is a lot longer. Like the soreness and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, dude, like half the week I'm sore. So what I would, from a mindset perspective, I'd be like, it is possible. Maybe it's or maybe it's at least close to getting to like, could I be where I was 10 or 15 years ago? And I think if you just have that mindset, like anything's possible. I think tactically, two of the things that I try to be very cognizant of is sprinting. Because apparently, statistically, after 30 years old, 95% of humans don't sprint anymore. And when you look at a sport like basketball, where there's a lot of like cutting and agility and sprinting, I think that might be something to consider. And then for basketball, maybe plyometrics, right? So more like the explosive stuff. So you can lift weights all day long, but as soon as you're like bouncing off one leg, you don't want to blow your Achilles. So I think like explosive training, especially as we get older, becomes really important, especially if we want to continue competing at a level that's somewhat respectable.
Love it.
But I think you can do it, man.
Yeah, I'm committed. Also love the game, so that helps a lot. And LeBron's a good motivator, given how old he is. He's still playing in the NBA. It's insane.
Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, that's crazy, dude. That's
crazy, man.
I mean, this is like a fantasy world. My last question is a little bit of a personal one. What is your favorite way to kind of unwind? Not at the end of the day, but like maybe you're going on a holiday for a week or two. Like, do you like city holidays? Do you like beach holidays? Can you get your head out of work? Or do you like to bring up with you like a book that you've just ordered that's going to help you, improve your efficiency at work? Or like, tell me a little bit about like, you're the entrepreneur going on holiday.
Well, this is very fitting because my wife and I, over the past 2.5 years, we've been building our dream home on the Pacific Ocean in Mexico. Wow. And the reason for that is because we've been to this one area about 12 times in our life. And when we saw what they're developing in this one area, we're like, we need to live there. So for me, when we go there, basically our neighbor is Hawaii. Like we are on a cliff and it's Pacific Ocean facing west. So for me to unwind, like I either put myself mentally there, we're actually going to be going in about a week and a half we're almost finished the build of the house. But that is like, we've literally built this house for this very question. It's like, when I want to unwind, I'm going to just sit in a chair and I'm going to look over the ocean and I'm going to enjoy whatever it is, dolphins, birds, nothing. And for me, that is the ultimate in terms of tranquility and peace, but also expansion. Because when you have this endless vista, there's a huge amount of like creativity, I think, that comes from that, as opposed to like looking at a brick wall in front of you. And so for me to unwind, like even where I live now, I typically will sit in the backyard and I'll just look up at our trees and I just sit there and I think, and I love doing that. So having obviously the winter come, not too far away, we wanted to have somewhere where we could escape, spend a couple months and have that sense of peace and tranquility. But also I don't want to not work. Like, I love working, but to have space throughout the day where I can have an hour to sit and think or exercise, go for a run, go for a lift, all of those are a way for me to unwind. And for me, it's a lot of work-life integration, as opposed to, I don't take weekends off. Like, I work 7 days a week, but it's only a couple hours here and there on certain days because I love doing it. And when I feel like I'm a little bit of a pressure cooker, if a lot of stuff is going on, for me, exercise, sweating is a really nice way to just kind of get it out of the system, and then just go for a walk in nature, stare at the sky. That's typically how I unwind.
I love this concept of something physical in the world, like a home that you're building, that you can go to in your head, and just, you've been there, you have that picture in your mind of the Pacific Ocean, and that's kind of a nice way to not only motivate you through a tough time, or maybe you're having a long day and you kind of remind yourself, okay, I'm working towards something that I've been dreaming about. I like this concept. I'm sure I've heard of it before, but the way you painted that picture right now really makes me think, because Nicole and I just were in Italy and we went to Sardinia, which was gorgeous, where Nicole's dad's from. And we went in the Bounty coast, and it's just like that, cliffs, and this is the ocean, or in this case, the Adriatic Sea, I believe, between Italy and Sardinia, or mainland Italy and Sardinia. And it's just incredible. It's just like it's hard for you not to be grateful. It's hard for you not to just wonder what's going on. What is this? This is incredible. It just blows you away. And the homes there are incredibly cheap because it's so hard to get there. I'm like, oh, maybe I should consider this now that Yuri's painting that picture in my head now. So
Yeah.
love it, man.
Well, I mean, for me, like it started with the picture in my head. Now I have it as a screensaver on my computer. But I think for a lot of stuff in my life, it's always started in my mind. I had a sense of what it was, put myself in the position, and then I was like, okay, let me just put this on repeats over and over again. And it's great.
Love it, man. Going to your happy place.
Yeah.
Yuri, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I absolutely love getting to know you even more, getting to know you a little bit better. There's something about you that I feel like is magnetic. Like you really believe in what you're doing. You're really pushing to help people out. Like it's genuine energy, like sometimes you meet people and you feel like, okay, they're saying the right things, but you don't actually feel it in your heart. But I definitely feel it. So thanks so much for showing up and giving it all.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words, because I do feel that way. I mean, I really, really do feel that I show up as my true self, and I'm just happy that others, including you, feel that as well. So I appreciate you.
Have a good one, man. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
What a great chat with Yuri Elkaim. If you want to learn more about his work, his books, the type of business he's running, and to go deeper on those core 10 that we discussed in the episode, just a few of them we discussed, but all 10 of them are great. Just go to his website. It's healthpreneurgroup.com. I learned so much from just going to great entrepreneurs' websites. What messaging are they delivering? What's the impression you're getting when you hit the website? How are they packaging their offers? I go to the About page and learn more about their story and how they got to where they are today. So this is one you want to check out. If you got a nugget, if you got something that really got you thinking, write it down. Put it in your journal so you don't forget it, right? And then ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? Right? You're going to take action. Are you going to implement this idea? Are you going to consider it in your business? What are you going to do with it? Right? Don't just be a passive learner. Take action with what you learned. That's what really moves the needle. That's what allows you to move forward. That's what has helped me over the years, and it can help you as well. One easy action you could take is make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you get our next episode automatically and you're part of the community. If you're on YouTube, just hit that subscribe button. If you're on any podcast app, Apple, Spotify, Castbox, whatever it might be, hit subscribe so you don't miss a beat. Thanks so much for listening to the $100 MBA Show, being a part of our community. I'll check you in the next episode. I'll see you then. Take care.